I do want to point out, as Gail did, that every item in our agenda today came from feedback from legislators. We spent a lot of time, members of our board, and certainly Gail and I, talking to legislative leaders about what they felt would be useful. And the very first panel that we have, and I'll ask the panelists to come on up as I speak, is empowering local educators. That was something that we were hearing from everyone as an element that would move the needle in West Virginia. If we empowered local educators, showed them that we trust them, supported them, that this has been something that the legislative leaders have talked about, the state board, the Department of Ed has certainly been, pushing for that, the teacher unions, everybody. So this, I think, will be very engaging. And I do want to introduce our moderator, and then he can introduce our wonderful panel. And as we said last night, we know the bios are all in the program, and we're happy about that. But I thought I'd just add a little something about Scott Roadtruck. He is a member of the state board. He's also, we're lucky to have him as a member of the PEC board. And he's currently the senior account executive at Orion Strategies, but he has 40 years of government affairs and community relations experience. He's also been appointed by 4 governors to various statewide boards like the state board. So he is in demand. And at one point in time, everybody was saying, why doesn't Scott run for governor? I heard that for years and years. But one thing that I know personally from Scott, and those of you that know him know this, he is the ultimate learner. He has such a love of learning. And as a classroom teacher, that's what's most important, if you instill that in students. And I think a teacher or parent along the way certainly did that with Scott. Recently, last month, he asked Maggie McDonald, our program coordinator, and I to do him a huge favor. And the huge favor, we were scared what that would be. It was access to the WVU library. He wanted a library card. So that shows you whenever he comes to a presentation, he's always prepared either to make or to moderate, or even if he's sitting back in the audience. And I saw footage of a state board meeting last month where he walked in with stacks of folders and binders like that. So he's very well prepared and very engaging, and we're so pleased to have you, Scott.
Thank you very much, Donna. I think 40 years, that's kind of a frightening number, isn't it? I had a misspent youth I'm making up for lost time. Actually, I do have an absolute love of learning, and I am so appreciative of being involved in the Public Education Collaborative. Gail, appreciate your work deeply. I think your body of work has embodied what we've tried to do, and that's to have a seamlessness between all the components of our educational system. That's how we're really going to make a difference for our goal was to have certain that we have great student achievement in West Virginia. And the economy and education are inextricably linked. We all know that. Today, we're going to shift gears now and go a little more locally. We have 3 folks who are going to talk to us about local flexibility, being able to do what makes the most sense in the local school district. What are they able to do with the resources they have? What freedom do they need from certain requirements now that maybe will allow them to serve the students a lot better? We're going to talk about how we have to maintain accountability, though. We can have flexibility, but as Superintendent Payne has cautioned, we have to make certain that we have accountability. That's so we can maintain compliance with the statute, with the Constitution, and with federal requirements so we can continue to get that much needed money. We have 3 folks, and the first person I'm going to introduce is Larry Bailey. He's the principal at Capitol High School. Larry has 16 years in total in education, correct, Larry? 8 as an educator, 8 as an administrator. He graduated from West Virginia State, as we heard, was an 1890 land-grant institution. Chancellor Nolan had mentioned that. He also has a 2007 degree from High Point University in leadership. Number 2, we'll have Ron During. And Ron, you look at me when I heard 40 years, but I think you have 21 years as superintendent in Kanawha County. 22nd year you're in right now. It's a fabulous accomplishment. And number 3, we have Jason Willis with us. He is the Director of Strategy and Performance at West Ed, and he's focused on comprehensive school assistance programs. How do you align policy and strategies and accountability? So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Larry first. I'll also take a seat, and we want you all involved. This is going to be a discussion. We have about 35 or 40 minutes. Larry, I'll turn it over to you first. Thank you.
Thank you and good morning, everyone. Once again, my name is Larry Bailey. I am principal at Capitol High School, right down the road from here. Just talking to you for a few minutes about the importance of the partnership between the local universities and colleges and the high school level. I actually wanted to speak to you about a partnership that we've had with Bridge Valley, that we've seen, the community college in South Charleston, that we've seen evolve over the last several years. About 3 years ago, John Duffy, who's over our school counselors in Kanawha County, and myself, with the support of Dr. During, established a small pilot program, and it was the first in Kanawha County, I'm not sure about the rest of the state, where we started dual-enrolled students at Capitol and Bridge Valley. I think we had about 15 students that spend half of their day at Capitol and half of their day on the campus at Bridge Valley. This is a model that you'll see across the nation in North Carolina and other states, early college programs with dual-enrolled students. These students, like I said, there were about 15 of them. They were enrolled in a allied health program out at Bridge Valley. The big selling point for us was not only that we could offer college credit as well as high school credit at the same time. We were also able, with the support of the superintendent, able to offer it at no cost to the students. We even paid for their textbooks. Our school, we have a high rate of economically disadvantaged students, so this was critical for us to be able to offer it at no cost. For a couple years, we had those students, and we piloted them through the program, and several of them went on to graduate. And they weren't finished with their program at Bridge Valley, but they had several hours when they graduated from Capitol and were well on their way. That has since evolved, and we've expanded our partnership with Bridge Valley. The last couple years, with the support of the superintendent and the administration at Bridge Valley, we're getting ready to roll out a program where we're targeting sophomores who will be dual enrolled in the early college program at Bridge Valley. And we're just really excited about that, and I could talk to you about that program for an hour, but we don't have time for all of that. But I think that what makes such a difference when we talk about the collaboration is at the high school level, we sit down, we meet once or twice a month, and we talk about the logistics. And college, when you work with people from the colleges, they're very broad perspectives, and they don't always think about the details. How are we going to eat lunch? How are we going to get the kids there? But the relationships that we've built with Bridge Valley in terms of designing the curriculum and working out a way to get the program at no cost to our students, and the logistics of how we're going to make it work, and building programs that the kids are interested in that are relevant, has made such a big difference. And it was really just a matter of putting all the proper people in the same room together, getting those conversations started. That has just been a stellar opportunity and a stellar partnership that we have with them. We also have relationships with several of the other colleges, West Virginia State, Marshall, UC, all the other colleges in the area. But I would love to see those relationships grow, because the example that I have with Bridge Valley is really something that we need to establish with the four-year institutions as well. But I agree that really when we look at it, our students want college credit when they get out, but it has to be affordable, and it has to be, they have to see the value in what it's going to take them. So that's all I have. I was just going to talk to you a little bit about that program. Thank you.
Okay, so as superintendent in Kanawha County Schools for 22 years, I've seen some changes, a few over the years. When we talk about flexibility within a school system, I think it's really important that we begin to give more flexibility to our local school districts. I think we're moving in the right direction. When we talk about the omnibus bill, you can say what you want. It has some controversial pieces, it doesn't. But the fact that they included a block grant for the school system where we can take a look at how we want to use our dollars within the school system and place them where we have our greatest need, I think is a right move in the right direction. When we also talk about a couple years ago, I guess 2711 was passed, gave us flexibility with our calendar. I think that was another great move. Also, when we talk about included in that bill was the flexibility about how we hire teachers into our classrooms, getting the right teacher in the right spot in the right school that fits that culture. I think that's really important in what we do. I think we have some work in the service personnel area to give us some more flexibility where we place service personnel working with individual students within our school. We also had the flexibility when you look at the transportation budget that there's a bus replacement cost. Ours is around $200,000. And so we're now allowed, if we don't need as many bus replacements that year, although in Kanawha we need them every year, we can use that money in another area. So I think we're beginning to see in West Virginia with our legislators and with our State Board of Education, who are any of our State Board members here? I just want to compliment them because, yes, I didn't know any others out there, but I wanted to compliment them because I think it's a board that truly believes in local school control and are starting to move in that direction as well about policies and things we do. For instance, they gave us direction on Math for Life, and all they said is this is how we'd like to see math improvement in every district, but as each district they were able to develop their own plan on how they wanted to meet that need within their district and not being directed on how that has to look. And so I think we're beginning to see all the moves in the right direction to give school systems the local flexibility that they need because every school district in West Virginia is different. But I can tell you that every superintendent and every administrator in that district and the teachers are all working very hard to meet the needs of the students and what they have in their district to move forward. So I applaud the work that's being done. I just feel that we need to look at everything and move even further in that direction about providing local flexibility within a school system.
Thank you. Before we turn it over to Jason, I'd just like to say again on behalf of everyone, thank you to all the legislators for being here with us today. This forum is for you. We know you're incredibly busy, but we appreciate you being here so very, very much. Jason?
Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. My name is Jason Willis with West Ed. I've been with the agency now for about 3 years, but previous to that, spent, similar to my fellow panelists, 12 years in school districts as a chief financial officer, primarily larger urban systems in California, but the realities of dealing with a limited set of resources and thinking about how best to apply those towards the improvement of the students that you're serving in those systems was a paramount thing that was sitting on my mind every day. And so when I think about the work and kind of my task of like setting the stage about where other states are nationally around this matter of flexibility and how that flexibility may lead to the more effective use of resources for improvement on kids. There's a couple of things that I just want to maybe set the table on. And the first is really thinking about how, or the term of resources. So when we work with states that are aiming to create more flexibility or create pathways to a more effective use of resources, there is obviously the money itself that's being distributed, and I think this already is reflected in some of the comments of my fellow panelists. There's the money itself, but the money itself is essentially buying people. We are a people business. Approximately 85 cents out of every dollar in public education is spent on people in some form or fashion. So the asset that we have to leverage to move towards a more effective use of resources are those people. And when you think about those people, there's different dimensions, right? It's who you are hiring, how you're defining their roles and responsibilities within the system itself, but it's also how you're leveraging their time. both their time with their fellow colleagues and other adults in the system, their time with students if they directly serve students, but also how they themselves are preparing to be professionals in a setting to help support students. So I just want to offer that as an initial frame as I kind of review some of the ways that we've seen states try to open up some of these issues around flexibility. And I think my first kind of major point around this is that what we have seen over the last 5 or 7 years throughout the country is there has been a large number of states that have been moving in this direction of wanting to offer more local flexibility to school districts. But it comes along with a couple of other things. And I think that this is the comprehensiveness that I think is important, and I want to put in front of you, all of you as state policymakers and state decision makers here in West Virginia. And in addition to the flexibility notion, which I'll get to in just a little bit, there's 2 other, what I would describe as kind of big trends that we're seeing with states. And the first one really has to do with the distribution of resources. That is that when states allocate resources to school districts, we have seen a growing body of research that would suggest that when you direct those resources to students of need, and those resources are used to support those students of need, the outcomes for those kids get better, right? And that is a policy goal that I think most everybody in the country is aiming for. You have a set of students that are not performing in the system in a way that we wish they were, and we want to be able to provide the opportunities for them to improve at faster rates than their better performing peers, to basically close the achievement gap, to eliminate that or to create that opportunity for them to succeed. And what we have seen in the research is that when states and subsequently school districts are very intentional about directing those resources, either money or how it shows up in the school district as people to those students, we see better results for those kids. And so we've seen a variety of ways in which states have attempted to do that. In large part, what they're thinking about is using their existing set of resources that are in the system and reevaluating how they're distributing them to school districts. So they might move away from, for example, this is at an extreme. When I was a CFO in a school district, there was a categorical block grant dedicated to gardens in middle schools. So there was some wisdom at the state capitol at the time that if we had gardens in middle schools, that somehow that was going to directly help student achievement. So, when the state eventually moved away from that approach to a block grant, they basically had said to us as a school district, we're collapsing that into, in part, your base grant, like the basic aid for all of general education students, and then a set of resources that were going to low-income, English learner, and foster youth students. So that wisdom of being able to make that transition away from something very specific and empowering that decision-making at the local level, but putting a frame, basically sending a signal to school districts about what the state cares about, the types of programming that we care about relative to the student's need, was obviously critical. So this second piece was really around accountability and support, which I think is a part of the puzzle that we're discussing today. And there's 2 different sides to accountability and support. Accountability is kind of traditionally associated with basically the publication or transparency of some set of data. In the United States, we think about that as student performance, as being able to drive improvement in the system. We've now seen with federal law in many states kind of moving to this mandate of putting out and reporting on school-level per-pupil expenditures, small little provision within ESSA that all states are required to meet starting next year. So you're getting some more data that's sitting out there with the idea that if you have data that's out there, that people can act on it and thereby improve the system. Another form of accountability is looking at a set of systems that aren't performing up to standard, and somehow the state would jump in to intervene and basically push those districts across the finish line in terms of improvement of those systems. And while we've seen the benefit of both of those types of primary mechanisms of what we would describe traditionally in literature as accountability, I would also argue that there's other elements that sit underneath of those policy and regulatory structures that are absolutely critical for states and school district practitioners to really consider. And you've heard themes of this coming up already, right? The term of relationships may seem like a very soft and kind of unwieldy notion within policy, which it absolutely is. But the importance of relationships in helping to drive things like common goal setting, or helping to drive things like consistent programming for kids, or thinking about ways to improve the program on behalf of those students, actually in the research has an extraordinarily large impact on the ability of the system to perform and improve itself. And so part of the question around this notion of accountability and support is, how as states do you create policy and regulation that create the frame and send the signal for that being your desire, but also create the appropriate amount of flexibility for practitioners to do that work? And I want to offer just a couple of examples, and then we can get in further to the discussion around this. But one of the examples, we've been working with the state of Nevada. They recently completely overhauled their school funding formula. Their bill reference is SB 543. The name of the formula is now the Pupil-Centered Funding Formula, named appropriately because the way in which the legislature is now directing resources to school district is on the basis of the student. And in the bill itself, it specifically calls out a section around monitoring and reporting. Now, the name is a little bit misleading, but what they talk about in that section is the ability to allow the State Board of Education and the State Department of Education to set a framework that would allow educators, school system leaders, to basically exchange practices around how they are more effectively using the set of resources that are being redistributed through this formula as a means to drive improvement. Right, so the state is creating a framework by which the school districts can now begin to operate in, but there is accountabilities. Like I said, there are still reports on improvement for students. There's still reports on how those dollars are being used, and that's being worked out. But this is one example in which a state is really trying to find that balance between offering flexibility to local school districts around the use of those funds, but also creating the right set of mechanisms that allow school districts to feel both empowered and trusted to do the best and make the best decisions on behalf of kids. And I think that's one of my biggest walkaways in this example in Nevada, is that when I was a CFO in a school district, one of the things that I would constantly talk about with the principals in which I worked with was that they were always in a better position to make a decision about what is best for a kid than I was. I'm in the central office. I'm sitting around with my budget analysts and my controller and my accountants working on other functions of the school district. I'm not in a position to be able to make those decisions about what's best for those kids. That principal, those teachers are. But they need the appropriate set of training and development in order to make those informed decisions. So it was important, again, to kind of create that framing, and that I would offer it as a tension, a healthy tension between how to enable those kinds of decisions for educators, but also hold that in line with making sure that they're making decisions to help improve the system overall. The last thing that I'll offer, in just another state example, when we think about these notions of flexibility and support, and this was already kind of referenced by my fellow panel makers, is to think about the types of access to public service that exist at the local level. Right? So you have higher education institutions, you have school districts, you have local health and social services, all of which are working with those students and families in some other dimension. But our ability to be able to build relationships and coordinate with those other agencies in benefit to those families and students is extraordinarily crucial. And in a lot of states and a lot of school districts, including the ones in which I've worked, in some ways you're kind of operating with the blinders on, right? So if there's a county mental health system, or there's a social service agency that is working with those family and child trying to address the same issue that your teachers in your school system are trying to address with that child in the classroom, that's a lost opportunity to create some efficiency and effectiveness around how to best support cohesively that family and that student. So I'll pause there, but just wanted to offer some kind of opening comments in terms of frames around this matter.
Thank you very much, Jason. That was a great wide perspective of what's going on in other places and places where we may look to for guidance. Any reaction to that, Larry? Specific reaction to it you'd like to share? Any additional flexibility that you all need? What do you need most that you don't have now in order to be able to accomplish the mission you're on?
Just to reiterate, the flexibility, the ability to network, sometimes I just speak on behalf of what it's like everyday life in a high school. And you get so focused on what is going on between your walls. And sometimes you lose sight of the whole vision. And over the last couple years, our secondary organization has worked to network with other high schools within our county. So not only to see what's going in our school, but to also see what's going on in the other schools. But we truly need to extend that beyond just the high schools. We need to also be networking, as we've referenced, with the community colleges, the local universities and colleges, and broadening that and opening that up to our students. And, one side note of that is to also take a real close look at our senior year. I know that's a very specific thing, and this is a very broad agenda, but to take a close look at a student's senior year, to open up doors and pathways for students to, as referenced, graduate early, to be dual enrolled to go attend colleges. And we, as a district, have done a great job with flexibility over the last years, but really to open that up even more.
Okay, thank you very much, Larry. Ron, any specific reflections?
Well, I would say that as we take a look at flexibility and we take a look at the laws in West Virginia, if you take a look at the West Virginia Public School Law Book, it's this thick. I mean, it's increased hundreds of pages to the point that everything is almost directed about what you do in your school system. So I would encourage our legislators to take a look at some of those laws and to bring a committee together of people within the state of West Virginia, educators, superintendents, teachers, and take a look at those laws and what are those things that are holding us back in our individual system, our school systems. And also the point about working with outside agencies and other people, I think that's important too. We try to do that in our school system, work with local agencies, local universities, as many of our superintendents in the districts do, looking for those outside resources that they can use within their community, I think is vital. There's always going to be a limited amount of dollars in education. So even though we get that flexibility, we can't always rely on just those dollars. We have to find other avenues to supplement what we're trying to do in our school district. And so I think that's another thing that we have to consider as we move forward with flexibility. Even though it's going to be there, it's not going to be the cure-all. And that we have to find ways to supplement what we're trying to do in our school system. I also think that with this comes a lot of accountability. If we're going to ask for the flexibility, then we have to be held accountable. And I'll gladly accept that accountability. When we work in our school system and we look at our budget, we do zero-based budgeting. And the first thing we ask ourselves in our management team, it's a management team, no decisions made in isolation, ever, within our school system. And we say, are we getting the best bang for this program, or the best bang for our dollar and what we're doing in our school system? If we're not, then we look at phasing that out. We not only take a look when we do zero-based budgeting, but we also take a look at what are our priorities in the school system. If we know our priorities and we know what we want to focus on, then when we have flexibility with our dollars, then we can put them in the right place. But we have to have that focus and that vision of knowing where we want to put that. Years ago, we started our 2020 vision for technology, and you'll hear more about that at lunchtime when we do our presentation. But our goal was, okay, if this is going to be something that we want to do in our school system, how do we use the state dollars that we get for funding for technology? What are we going to do in the Kanawha County school system within our budget, and how are we going to use those dollars towards that technology? What outside resources can we use outside? And again, you'll hear about that today, but we've had two wonderful technology grants, one with Amazon and one with NASA, within our school district. And then we build our technology program, but it becomes a priority, and we protect that as we begin to look at various budgets and things that we're trying to do in our school system. So again, the flexibility, being able to use those dollars, how can we supplement them, but also we need to be held accountable for those dollars and how we spend them. Not only how we spend them, but how it's improving achievement within our school system.
I think your idea about convening practitioners and folks that are in the trenches together to figure out what we can reduce in terms of unnecessary policy burden is a great idea. Until we're able to do that, if there is something that you need a waiver from, we will entertain that at the state board. I mean, that's an interim measure that we can do. So thank you very much, Ron. Does anybody have a question for one of the panelists? Let's open it up to legislators first. Any questions for the panelists? Yes, sir.
I like the opportunity for dual credit classes better. I like the idea of my junior or senior child taking a class in front of a professor, even if it's a hybrid online class. And I would wonder, it seems the school aid formula, maybe they're closer to equal, but it still has some sort of preference for AP classes. And I would wonder your input on the comparison between dual credit versus AP classes.
What you've seen over the last several years, AP used to rule. AP used to really rule the roost. But over the recent years, high schools, at least in Kanawha County, we've all been growing our dual credit numbers because dual credit classes are in high demand from our students. And, we don't like to say it, but this generation of students is what can I get? What can I get the best value, the most credits, the most opportunities, the best programs? So we, as local high schools, truly believe if we don't provide the proper opportunities for our students within our school, they'll find another school to go to where they can get those. But what we look at is the dual credit numbers are in high demand. Several different ways that you can offer a dual credit class. You can have a professor come in from a local university or college and teach that class. However, we're most successful in our building when we have our teachers that qualify, that know our kids that are in our building that teach those dual credit classes. But I think AP is a very solid program. Obviously, we take the daytime SAT, so we're bought into the College Board and the AP program. But there's a smaller group of students that are driven by AP because, with AP, you need to take the AP testing at the end of the year. It's not a guaranteed credit when you take an AP class. With dual credit, it's open to a wider variety of students. If they're successful in the class, they get at least a B. They know that it's a guaranteed credit within the state, that it will transfer to any of the universities or the colleges. However, our philosophy is we can't go all AP, we can't go all dual credit, we can't go all career and technical ed. We need to offer something for everyone. And that's really what we've been trying to do, is not just increase programs for one, but increase programs for all. So that, our goal is 60% college educated, but what about the 40% that aren't going to college? So we have to have strong career and technical ed programs as well. So I hope that answered your
Delig,
question.
does that answer your question? Ron, something to add, please?
I'd like to add to that. I don't think, to me, it's not a conflict, but it's about choices. Over the past few years, we've heard that public schools can't offer choices, but we can. We can offer AP courses. We can offer dual credit courses. At South Charleston High School, we have an international baccalaureate program. We have apprenticeships. We have internships within our school system. And as Mr. Bailey pointed out, it's about offering choices and pathways and avenues for our children to be able to exceed and move forward within the public school system. And that's what it's all about. Not that they're in conflict, but that for some kids, AP is a wonderful track to take. For some, it's dual credit, and it's a wonderful track to take. And the idea of moving these kids forward, we have more and more requests for kids graduating in 3 years, and we're allowing it. If they can show us that they've completed the coursework in 3 years, and they can show us that they have to submit a letter that they've been admitted to a post-secondary education in some way or shape, or form, then we allow them to graduate in 3 years. Our students are changing every day. We had one student who wanted to graduate in 3 years because they wanted to go into the arts. Their parents were sending them overseas in England for a year, and they wanted to travel. They were going to a university over there. We allowed that to happen. So it really is about having choices in the public school system and giving our kids different pathways to graduate, and not just sitting in a school in a 4-room blocked room listening to everything that's being said all day long. And so I would say that it's not conflict, it's choices, giving our kids the ability to find different pathways to graduate.
Well, so Jason, any reflections from your national purview as to that subject that could be helpful?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the way that Ron framed this around choices for students, I think it's appropriate, given the fact that you are not going to have 100% of all kids that are going to college. You're not going to have 100% of all kids that are going through dual enrollment or that is in CTE. I think part of thinking about improvement on the system is thinking about where your most vulnerable populations are, and ultimately how do you direct resources to those populations to ensure that they see those opportunities and they can pursue those different pathways. Because ultimately, those children are going to turn into adults that are contributing members of society. And that can generally go in 2 different ways. One, they are tax-paying citizens that are contributing to their community and to their society. Or there are folks that are kind of drawing on social services. And what we see in the research clearly indicates that when those students are taking advantage of those opportunities or moving on to higher education or other opportunities, that they are contributing to the growth and strength of the economy and kind of social community in which they live. And so this notion of having those choices makes a lot of sense from the perspective of different options for students, but thinking about how best to make sure that you are serving those students and getting them the resources and the access necessary to move in that direction is something that's really important. And this is a small anecdote on the topic of AP and dual enrollment. When I was working as a practitioner, one of the initiatives that we launched, and I had to sign off on a redirection of resources to help support the high schools in this, was promoting both kind of dual credit, dual enrollment classes, but also AP classes. And one of the things that we had to work on was really changing the mindset of adults, where on paper the student might look like they wouldn't be eligible for dual enrollment, or they might not be eligible for AP. But it was shifting the mindset of the adults to have the conversation with the student, right? So it was going from not waiting for the kid to show up, but the adults taking an active stance to reach out to those students and say, hey, I see an opportunity for you in this direction, or this might be something that would be of interest to you. So creating those kinds of environments for students, which it sounds to me like in both the case of Ron and Larry, they have some of those incentives that are set up in their systems. How do you create those opportunities statewide to make sure that you're framing that? And one example I'll just put out on the table that in coming to West Virginia, kind of learning a little bit more about your state, as with a lot of states, struggling with the kind of recruitment and retention of high quality teachers. It is a nationwide challenge right now in thinking about the profession of education and how public education can contribute more broadly to society. And one thing that I would put in front of state policymakers and to the state in general is thinking about how the state might continue to accelerate efforts to think about recruiting and bringing in high quality teachers in West Virginia. And obviously you have your higher education institutions in which they generate a certain number of those teacher candidates every year. But you also have individuals in your communities that might be interested in coming up through the ranks of either classified staff into certificated positions, but also thinking about how to recruit them. And the state is in a position in which they can do things in which individual districts, for example, those that Ron and Larry come from, that districts can't do. So how do you create policy incentives that allow the state to bring in high quality teachers that are able to kind of continue to kind of improve the system.
Okay, thank you, Jason. Yes, ma'am, please. Thank you.
Important aspect of education and how it improves quality. I applaud what you're doing at the high school level. My biggest concern is we're losing them back in kindergarten moving forward. And I believe a lot of that has to do with the absolute fear of a discrimination suit when you try and take students at risk and give them the special care. Everybody has to be mainstreamed. So you'll have a first grade class where you might have 5 very disruptive kids, but you can't really remove them. But at the same time, you have some other children who are not comfortable because of the behavior that they experience with these other children, and they end up wanting to leave. I have many people, young parents, who absolutely say they want to have choice. We heard in our education committee about a project from Miami of Ohio where they're taking education students and making them mentors of students at risk, more at a high school level. But why couldn't we, with the number of universities, create programs in the elementary school that are a choice thing for a parent who might have a child of special needs to actually address that, so we don't have kids on the 3rd grade reading level in high school. That to me is, we cannot continue, and if we don't address those early years, we're never going to be as successful as we could be.
I think that's an extremely insightful question. Thank you. I think Ron is wanting to answer. I would like to take the occasion to thank the legislature for the wraparound service money that was in the bill. That's extremely important. It's not a panacea, but it'll go a long ways towards addressing the needs to help those kids in class, not only for themselves, but also for the others who are trying to learn. So thank you. And Ron, if you'd like to answer that.
Well, I think we can do that in the elementary schools, and we are beginning to take a look at that. Again, this afternoon I'll talk a little bit more about that. But as we take a look at what's happening in our elementary schools, we are offering programs. We have robotics programs in our elementary schools. They're beginning to do all kinds of little things like that within the elementary school. But I think the biggest thing that you need to keep in mind is that the public school system, and especially at the elementary level, can address these issues. What you're talking about really is kids with trauma and how they're in the classroom. Right now, we've been doing some heavy training in our school district on trauma-informed schools and doing social and emotional learning, SEL, with our students, with our teachers as well. And there are things that we can do to alleviate that in the classroom when that kind of happens. For instance, and I just came back from a conference, and we are experimenting with some of it in our schools, but in our elementary schools, we're now having peace corners. And peace corners are areas where students can go and calm down. There's little activities they have to follow that actually bring them down. We also, we have mindfulness now. We're taking kids through, there's this kind of obstacle-like little course that you take them through in the morning to take their mind off of why they're upset. Mindfulness, we're doing that as well. We're experimenting in our school district with several pilots on wellness rooms, where we're taking and staffing our schools with the wellness rooms. So really a 3-tiered model approach. You have the first 80% of students you deal with in the classroom. That's teacher strategy, that's peace corners, that's strategies for social emotional learning. How do you pull the kids in so that the classrooms don't become disruptive? You have tier 2, which is the 15%. What do you do when you escalate to this level? And that's where we take them out and we take a look at the wellness rooms. We're doing that at the elementary level. We're also doing another program at the high school level. And we've been very successful with that program. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. And then what do you do with the top 15% that are causing problems in the classroom? We are experimenting right now. We're actually in the beginning stages of developing telehealth, working with telehealth, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later. But I think what we have to do is when we take a look at our students that are coming into the elementary level and all the trauma that they have in their lives, we have to equip our teachers with the skills to de-escalate that in the classroom so it doesn't become so disruptive that the teacher can't continue to teach and kids can't continue to learn. And at the same time, offering a variety of programs to elementary students, like our robotics program that we do. I can't think of some right off the hand that we're doing in some of our other elementary schools, but to provide those types of programs so that we can keep our classrooms calm and students can learn.
So, Jason, before we do, Ron, you're referring then to continued professional development, right? Is that a big focus?
Absolutely, because we're dealing with students who have a lot of trauma in their background. And again, you'll hear it again this afternoon. But if you saw in the paper the article, every 50 students out of every 1,000 have been affected by the opioid crisis. And I'll mention these numbers again because I think they're important later. In Kanawha County, we have over 500 homeless students. We have over 60 students that are unattended who have no adult in their life at all. 1/3 of them are being raised by their grandparents. Out of 25,300 kids, 87% of our kids qualify for free lunch. So there's a lot of trauma out there in our schools, and we have to equip with our teachers through staff development how to deal with these in the classroom and at the same time let learning take place. And so in our system, we're doing a lot of training right now with our teachers on social emotional learning techniques that they can use in the classroom, trauma-informed schools, peace corners, wellness rooms, how do we de-escalate, working with a lot of outside agencies. We have the Handle with Care program. I know many other districts do too, where we get notifications to help with those students during the day. So there's a lot out there that we need to do. And what you're finding out is that these elementary students are now, with all this trauma-informed, hitting the middle schools for the first time. They're about at the 6th grade. Once they feed through middle school, they're going to end into high school. And if we can't get them to understand at the elementary level what school's about, if we can't help de-escalate and get them therapy and help them, then they will become bigger problems later. And so we have to provide safe learning environments.
Thank you very much, Ron. James, I see you standing up. That's indicative of we're getting close to our time, correct? We have a couple minutes?
That's correct, yeah. We
Okay.
have a few more minutes.
Final, yes, sir. Chairman Schott, question, please.
I think one thing that would be helpful to the legislators, because keep in mind, probably the majority of our members of the legislature do not have any recent contact with the school system. We have a number of professional educators, we have some service personnel, we have some former school board members, but the majority don't. So translating the term flexibility into specific legislative proposals would be really helpful. Scott, as you remember, we had our first legislative interim this summer. We invited a number of folks in, and we certainly appreciate your involvement, seeking to translate that term into some specific action items we could deal with. And we heard a lot of generalities and a few specifics, but it was pretty disappointing in terms of translating that to something we can act on. And probably more importantly, some unanimity among the various stakeholders as to those type of actions that we can take. A good illustration is, Mr. Willis mentioned recruitment. As you know, in West Virginia, we have some very significant obstacles to overcome to be able to offer prospective professional educators a job right out of college. And that's an area where there's some conflict as to the possible solutions to that. You know, we've got the posting and bumping procedure we have to go through, and I'll give you a quick personal example. My legal assistant's daughter graduated from a local college in southern West Virginia, had offers from North Carolina and the local school system, but the offer from North Carolina was, here's your school, come down and meet your principal, here's your classroom. In West Virginia, our local superintendent basically would say, we think we'll have a position for you, but we don't know where. We don't know where you're going to be situated, so you can't arrange your housing until we go through the process of posting and bumping and so forth. So like most kids with student debt, she took a bird in the hand and moved to Statesville, North Carolina. And unfortunately, the consequence of that was her parents followed her along with her grandmother. So we lost, and she since had a child. So we have 4 generations there we lost to West Virginia just because of that process that we really need a solution for. So in general, if your group could get the stakeholders together and try to give us some specific, especially if there's a unanimous agreement among the stakeholders, I think there's a receptivity in the legislature to give you some flexibility. We just don't know how to translate that.
Well, I know that Superintendent During had mentioned earlier about convening a group of practitioners to try to get very specific recommendations. I understand what you told us. Thank you very much for sharing that. We have time for one more question. Do you have a follow-up? Yes, ma'am.
When we were discussing House Bill 206, and one of the educators in that forum, I happen to have the copy of Chapter 18 in my hand, and she said the first thing and the best thing you could do would be throw that out. But I will add that we also received a letter from the School Board Association saying that they were not going to touch any of that. At the same time that I have had parents of young, newly graduated teachers that they taught for a year or two and then they decided to stay home and homeschool their kids. I think that is a huge statement about the problems when it comes to how educators are managed. I have also heard from a number of teachers who say they have to try and hide the creative things that they're doing with their classroom because their principal doesn't like it. And then you hear other teachers that are thrilled because they've got a principal that really supports that. So I don't know if there's anything that the leadership in education can do to ensure that the principals leading our school, who have a huge impact on what happens in the classroom, to encourage what we all want to see happen.
I do know that Superintendent Payne has been highly focused on that with leadership development for our principals across the state, and that's a very insightful point. James is actually giving us the hook. The good news is Ron's going to present at lunchtime, and there'll be a question to go deeper on some of these subjects then. Again, thanks to all the legislators for being here. I know that the economy and education, again, are inextricably linked. There's a number of us who are going to try to do everything we can to build some new wealth in this state to make the job that the legislators have of creating the budget that's necessary more doable. Thank you all. Let's thank the panel very much. Thank you.